Good day, Twan. Today is the 1st of June 2020. I am still Yoshi Livo streaming 20 miles out of Liberland. And today is a special day. We have a Honkler Hangout marathon today. So I'm very excited that I'm very grateful that you could change your schedule around, especially for us and the stream. Since we last spoke, an incredible amount of news came towards us. I would like to know from you if you got anything or if you know what happened with Trump. Most of all, that's what I would like to hear from you, and what you have been doing since our last stream, basically. So I want to give you all the freedom to talk about whatever. But I would really like to hear from you what you think about the USA withdrawing from the World Health Organization and the Twitter fight that Trump made, and um, yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Well, to start with the WHO. Um, well, as you know, in general, I think that almost all things that governments do is either wasteful or is undermining our liberties and should not be done at all.
hmm
So it's usually either it's wasteful, unproductive, or counterproductive. And to the extent that the government does anything that's productive, it will be better to privatize it, leave it to the market because they would do it much better and much cheaper. And as for the WHO, in theory, it could have been an organization that would do productive work, just less efficiently and less productively than the private sector could.
hmm
But in practice, the WHO has actually been counterproductive. They've been very political, and they have actually caused problems far more. They've caused far more problems than they have solved. So I think it is a very good decision to withdraw um, support, financial support especially. I think
yeah,
it is very wrong to force taxpayers to hand over their hard-earned money to pay for these bureaucrats who actually cause far more damage than they do good. So I can be very critical of Trump. I think he's made a lot of very bad decisions, but he's also made a few good ones, and this is one of the good ones.
I kind of agree, or I mostly agree with that. Um, yeah, for me it sounded a little bit as a declaration of war. Did you hear something like that as well, or is that too harsh for me? Is that too much? Is it just some strong talk?
Well, well, that's Trump's style. He likes trade wars and Twitter wars and all kinds of wars, drug
Yeah.
wars. So yeah, and he promised to end the wars, and he hasn't. I mean the military wars.
hmm
Um, so that's his style. Um, what can I say? It's not my style. I don't approve of it, but I do think that the WHO is a very bad organization. So it's a great idea to stop funding it.
And basically, if I get it correct, if I understood it correct, it was a response to what the People's Republic of China has been doing in Hong Kong. And Hong Kong has been mentioned by you a couple of times before as a showcase of how liberty can benefit us all. Do you have any more insight in what exactly happened last week in Hong Kong with the People Republic of China? Do you know any of that? What made Trump so angry that he had to resign from the World Health Organization?
I I'm not aware of those two being connected because his criticism of the WHO is much older than a week. Um, so I haven't heard that these two things are tied to each other. I have heard that Trump has decided to end a trade agreement with Hong Kong. At the moment, there is a very beneficial trade agreement with Hong Kong, which results in far lower trade barriers, like
Yeah.
tariffs, than with the rest of the People's Republic of China. And what I've heard is that Trump has announced that since China no longer respects Hong Kong's autonomy, he no longer feels that special agreement with Hong Kong should be allowed to continue to exist, and he's going to end the agreement and subject trade with Hong Kong to the same. Well, he's going to subject trade with Hong Kong to the same barriers as trade with China, which I think is a very bad decision for many reasons. One reason is that I, in general, think that free trade is the right thing to do.
Hmm.
Uh, um, I'm a big fan of unilateral free trade. Um, and not just me, but pretty much every free market economist that's ever lived has been very much in favor of unilateral free trade, including Milton Friedman, Adam Smith, Ricardo. But even left-wing economists, even Paul Krugman supports free trade. I've heard that over 95% of economists, not that that is evidence of anything, but
Hmm.
it's just an interesting fact that even the economists on the left support free trade because even they recognize that trade barriers like tariffs hurt everyone. They hurt both sides. They hurt the consumers whose prices are going up, and they hurt the producers who can sell less. And more money goes to the government, who spends it on bad stuff, on undermining our liberties. So it's a lose proposition to impose trade barriers.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, the politicians, they try to show a victory and tell us, look, we're gonna make billions of dollars now that we are gonna put tariffs on it. But what they forget is that they just get the favor back at them when the other country is gonna put tariffs on their products, right? And that's how everybody
Well,
loses, exactly how you say.
yeah. So what happens is Trump imposes higher taxes on American consumers and hurts them
Hmm.
uh, that way, and then the Chinese retaliate. The Chinese government retaliates
Yeah,
by imposing high taxes on Chinese consumers.
yeah.
It's a very strange way of retaliation. Um, um, Best thing to do is to unilaterally end all trade barriers, regardless of what other countries do. That's what Hong Kong has done, as a matter of fact, ever since. Well, for the last 60, 70 years or so, Hong Kong has had no trade barriers. They have unilaterally uh, adopted free trade, and that's one of the reasons why Hong Kong has seen so much growth, why it has become so incredibly rich, even though it was extremely poor just 60 years ago. 1960 it was still a very poor country. Now it's one of the richest countries in the world, and
Yeah.
part of the reason is the decision to have unilateral free trade policy. So
Twan.
that's a bad decision, obviously. As for the WHO, that's a very good decision. Um, I, um, I had no idea that there was a connection between the two.
Well, in the same speech that he withdrew from the WHO, he also mentioned Hong Kong like a billion times. And what I heard, oh, I got a new followers, point 1G. Welcome to the stream. Twan, give me 1 second because we are 5 minutes away from the first free roll tournament that I'm organizing, and I need to show people the password. It's written here, guys, in the top. All men are connected is the first password of the first poker tournament. And then we do a raffled one every 20 minutes. So I need to keep the people happy before they're gonna lynch me here. I have 7 participants in this round. I want to wish good luck to all of them. I'm gonna make a quick raffle and we're gonna continue our chat with Twan. I'm gonna pick a winner. Gitana Gold, congratulations, Gitana Gold. Let's see what you want. I'm gonna spin the wheel for you, Gitana. And that is a Keith Patrick, a loser draw. That is how it is sometimes. 25 little under 25%, I believe, to win that one. Let me do another 20-minute raffle and get back to Twan. Sorry for that one. There's so many things happening. I'm setting up all these things together, and well, let's see, let's see. Can you speak for a second?
Yeah, I can. I can read a quote to you about the WHO.
Please do so.
In 2017, the Associated Press found, according to internal documents obtained by the Associated Press, the UN Health Agency routinely has spent about $200 million a year on travel expenses,
Yeah.
more than what it doles out to fight some of the biggest problems in public health, including AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. With a staff of about 37,000 aid workers versus WHO's 7,000 staffers, Doctors Without Borders spends about 43 million on travel a year.
Wow. Yeah. The the one of the things Trump also mentioned is that the corruption within the WHO, how China basically dominates the decisions there, even though they pay a fraction of what the United States is paying. Um, there have been a lot of negative talks about the WHO, basically since a very long time already, but especially since the Corona COVID 1984 happened to the world. And the reason why we are in a lockdown in so many places in the world is because the WHO is recommending that to the governments. So how can it be that a well the longer it continues, that's my information of the last week, is that now the independent journalists, because the journalists of the mainstream media, they don't really do any research, or they just tell the story of the WHO. But now the people that have some kind of a connection in that field of virology, or have knowledge about pandemics, I have seen people in the last week that with all the best interest at heart, and they want the best for the world and for their government even. They mention things like, I wish all of this wasn't true, but I have to believe that my government is fighting a war against me. And how can it be that one institute like the WHO has become so powerful that the entire world at the moment is locked in their homes, and is taking measures that don't really benefit the people that are at risk, but they cause a lot of damage to basically the 98.9% of the people that are not at risk, right?
How did the WHO become so powerful?
Yeah,
Well, they don't. I mean, they don't have any real power in the sense they don't. There is no. They have no army. The UN has no army, so in that sense, they have no power. The extent to which they have power is that the politicians who do command police forces and armies, they tend to take the WHO's advice. They tend to listen to them and assume that what they're saying is the truth. And in that sense, indirectly, they are in a very powerful position. And the question is, why is that? Why do they have so much credibility? And I think that has to do with the fact that most people tend to believe that centralization is a good thing. So they seem to think that the bigger the government is, the bigger the country is, the bigger the supranational organization is, the more credibility it has, and the less likely it is to make mistakes, and the more likely it is to be good for the common good. It's the same thing with people who are in love with centralization in the European Union. There's a lot of politicians and their supporters who believe that the more we centralize things, the more the EU does, the more power is devolved from member states to the EU, the better it is, the better we'll all be off. And I think that part of the reason is probably um, that they that they have an agenda, which is they don't want the chicken that lays the golden eggs to fly away. They don't want capital and talent and entrepreneurs to be able to escape. What they want is harmonization. They want the same rules to apply over as large an area as possible. And they want the same taxes and tax rates to apply to as large an area as possible, to make it very difficult for talent and capital and entrepreneurs to escape the high burden of taxation and regulation. Uh, and for that, centralization and cartelization is a great idea. And they hate it when businesses and investors and talent are able to just thumb their noses at them and escape to a country that has a more favorable uh, climate with a lower burden of tax and a lower burden of regulation. So that's why they have this gut feeling that centralization is good. And of course, the UN is the ultimate form of centralization. I mean, the EU does a lot of centralization, but then in theory, people can still escape to countries outside the EU. But
Like
if you,
Serbia.
yeah, but if the UN gains more power, if the UN will centrally come up with regulations and all the member states of the UN all follow these regulations, then there is no escape anymore. Then you have to escape to Mars or Venus or Antarctica, but there is no real escape from that. So that's the people who are in favor of centralization. That's their wet dream. That's what they would want the most. That there is no more escape. That you have to submit to their rule and to their rules and their regulations. So I think that's why the UN is so popular amongst politicians and amongst people who are in favor of big government. And that is why also a lot of the journalists feel the same way because, well, most journalists, they've gone to government schools. That by itself has caused them to be pro-government. But most journalists depend on their paycheck
Yeah.
um, for writing about the government. I mean, open any newspaper, and most of what is written about is government policies, politicians. That's 90% of the news. And all these journalists are very keen on maintaining a good relationship with those in power because then they can get stories, they can get to write about them. If they're too critical, they won't be invited to the press
Yeah.
conferences. They won't
Yeah.
be invited. Uh, they won't be allowed any interviews and so forth. So there is this very unhealthy relationship between journalists and the politicians, unfortunately.
And Twan, let me try it once more because I have to every week. I will just try. Now that we see all the current events happening and this speech that you uh, give for basically, let's say, 30 years now, this story didn't change, right? I mean, the problem still exists. The government is too centralized and suppresses its people, and more people, in my opinion, start to agree with that story. When you started this 30 years ago, you would have way fewer people understanding what you were actually talking about, right? So, do you see anything changing in the last, let's say, year or since you started? Is the public bias changing?
Well, to a point. I mean, the fact that Brexit not only that
Yeah.
the Brexiteers won the referendum, but that actually Brexit happened.
Yeah.
That is significant because, as you know, both the overall majority of the Dutch and the French rejected the EU
I believe it
constitution
was
referendum,
62% that voted against in the Netherlands.
simply ignored.
Yeah.
Um, and the fact that the outcome of this referendum has, to well some extent, we still have to see how it all turns out after the transition period is over. But it seems that the outcome of the Brexit referendum is adhered to, at least to a large extent, than the ones that were held in France and the Netherlands. So that is that is a good thing. Also, the fact that in all of these referendums, the people voted against more centralization. The overall majority of the people in all three of these countries voted against it. That obviously is a good thing. Um, so there are some of these
Yeah.
trends are positive.
Yeah, the thing is, I hear you say that, but then again, so now in Brexit, finally something happened on that level. But in the Netherlands and in France, although we can vote whatever we want, we can vote against Ukraine, we can vote against EU. I mean, at it just continues. The train doesn't stop, right? And so what
Yeah.
point, at when uh, I have stopped voting. I wrote a text that I'm gonna read out today, that I believe one of the ways how we can change this system is by stopping to vote, because the vote doesn't matter anyway. The only way how you can show your disapproval is by not going to vote. Instead of voting against, just let them have that vote.
Well,
Uh,
I've heard that the risk of getting killed in a car accident on the way to the voting booth is probably larger than the chance that that your vote will change the outcome.
I thought you
Uh,
were going to say that something with the COVID. COVID.
no,
Never mind. Never mind.
yeah. So
Yeah,
I agree that one individual vote doesn't make any difference. But not voting doesn't help either. Um, at least it saves you a little time and trouble, but other than that, it doesn't help either. If you want to make a difference, that's very hard to do. But if that's what you want to do, the best thing to do so is probably by spreading your ideas. And one way to do that is to write books. Another way to do that is to write articles or to write letters to the editor. It's to um, it depends on your personality. If you're a good writer, write. If you're a good speaker, speak. If you're good at making podcasts, then make podcasts. If you're good at running for office, run for office. I mean, there's no one. It's not that there's one thing that's the best thing to do. It depends on
of
your
course.
personal
Yes.
skills and your personal preferences. What the best thing to do is to make a difference. And another thing that you can do to make a difference is at least, well, how shall I put this? Be honest about your opinions. Don't hold your opinions to yourself or even lie about your opinions because you're afraid of what other people will think or will say.
Yeah.
And you may have to pay a price for doing so. But if making a difference is what's important to you, then it might be worth paying that price. Um, Another thing that you can do is that's the long haul. It's the long-term solution is to have children and raise them with sound ideas.
I need
Um,
5 billion of them then. I will take over the world. That's gonna be a hell of a job. Hey.
but
Oh,
if you want to see, I mean, there are a few people that have been very influential whose efforts to make a difference have indeed made a large difference, and those people I think are people like Ayn Rand, Ron Paul, Milton Friedman, Hayek. All of these people have made a lot of efforts to make a difference, and they have been very successful. To give you an example, uh, Margaret Thatcher has radically changed the policies of the UK after she was elected in 1979. The top income tax rate in the UK for labor income was 83%. For investment income, it was even 97%. And she dropped both of these rates to 40%. A lot of businesses were monopolized by the government, were nationalized by the government, including the car. Most of the car industry was nationalized by the British government. So since World War II, even Jaguar used to be a state-owned company
Didn't know
uh,
that.
in the 70s. Oh yes, most Austin Rover, British Leyland, all of them, Morris, all of these were nationalized by the British government. And until Thatcher, the word privatization did not exist because it had never been done. Until then, there were only nationalizations. There were no privatizations, so there was no word for it. And she has started this policy of privatizing government-owned businesses that has been very successful. So she made a big difference. And she has, on many different occasions, declared that she was highly inspired by Friedrich von Hayek. Um, Ronald Reagan, he was responsible for dropping the top income tax rate in the United States from 70% to 28%. And it's a well-known fact that he was highly influenced by Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman has played a very important role in getting rid of the military drafts in the United States. Um, he has made a very strong case for abolishing the draft during the Vietnam War, and a lot of people took his ideas very seriously. And it was abolished around the same time that America left Vietnam. So yes, there are people who have made a difference. Um, so one way to do this is to follow their example. Another way is to, well,
Said you make your own.
yeah, make your own path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If I think about what you say now, I had my moment 2 years ago, Twan. I should have made it all back then, but there is one more thing I would like to talk with you about. To finish that
Oh,
statement before.
one more point I'd like to
Oh,
make.
yeah, sure. Sorry.
Well, another thing you can do is start a business venture that increases people's freedom. Like Uber, for instance, like Airbnb, like cryptocurrencies.
Yes, like the EFL, I want to say.
These are business ventures that can serve to increase people's freedom. And as you know, I've decided to devote my career to advising draftees on how to avoid the military draft and advising taxpayers on how to avoid taxes.
Hmm.
So that's another thing that you can do to make a difference.
Yeah. The one other thing that I would like to talk with you about, Twan, is the second thing that happened with Trump this week. It was his Twitter war, but this time not on Twitter, but with Twitter. And
Yes.
what happened? I don't know. You know what happened, or shall I just give
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah. I
brief
know what
intro?
happened. Sort of. Yeah. Well, on the one hand, I understand his frustration because I'm sometimes frustrated too. For instance, I tried to post on Facebook a YouTube video
Yeah,
of a climate scientist, a climatologist, who was skeptical of the mainstream view on climate change.
yeah,
And what Facebook did is they declared it to be fake news or incorrect, and they
yeah,
blocked it.
yeah.
And that's very frustrating. So I understand the frustration,
But
but I still think he made a very bad move here because um, freedom of speech is supposed to protect um, us from the government restricting our speech.
hmm
So in other words, it's to protect Twitter from Trump, not Trump from Twitter. When his response was to impose government restrictions on on private actors, on private organizations such as Twitter. and that is wrong. Um,
Yeah,
so,
but
yeah,
Twan, these actions that Twitter is taking have been brought forward by policymakers. It's not as
I
if
know.
Twitter wants to censor everybody. They have been brought to I don't know in which house or senate that has been spoken about, but these people are making Twitter spend thousands of millions on censoring people based on false facts, and then the false facts. I mean, they don't, they cannot even prove their own facts. So how can, especially with the COVID 1984 at the moment, the policies that are being taken right now, they are not proven. Everybody that goes against these policies has most often an endless amount of proof how it is not working what the government is doing, yet those people are censored for bringing fake news. So
Yes.
it's not as if Twitter wants to censor those people, but they have to. So
Well, I don't know if they have to. And if they do, if they're being coerced by the government to do this, then obviously that's what should end. That's what we should fight against. So it's what Trump should fight against.
mhm.
But from what I understand, is he is not he was not proposing lifting government imposed restrictions. He was proposing to
His own.
impose new restrictions,
Uh.
and that is the road to hell.
Yeah. Well, I
Because
do agree on that.
there,
Yes.
there, there are basically only two options, and that is either we have free speech, which means we have the freedom to express ourselves any way we like, no matter how much it offends someone, no matter how bad it makes other people feel. Uh, we have the right to say whatever we want. That's freedom of speech. And the only alternative is that we have a government, that we have bureaucrats and politicians who decide what we are allowed to say and what we're not allowed to say. Those are basically the only two options.
Hmm.
And I'm in favor of option number one. I'm in favor of free speech. And that means that there are no government restrictions. And the First Amendment of the United States is very clear about this. In the way it's written, it starts off saying, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. It's very clear language.
Yeah, what I understood from this speech that he held about Twitter is that there are government policies in place to allow platforms like Twitter to delete child pornography, just to name something, because they are just a platform where people can publish and they are not a editor, but they should have a rule in place to delete stuff that is illegal to have, like child pornography. And that's how these first rules came into existence, to allow digital platforms like a Twitter to delete user content. And
Well, I think that they should be able to delete whatever they want for any reason.
yeah, well, in a way, me too.
Yeah.
But that's how it started, and now they are
Yeah.
using that to protect people from strange opinions, right? Stuff like that. And
Well, I know what you're referring to. What you're referring to is legislation that exempts platforms from being found liable for content that was placed by third parties, by users, by people who
yeah,
use the
yeah,
platform.
yeah.
And so they make a distinction between, let's say, publishers and platforms. And if you publish something under US law, you are responsible for what you publish and can be sued for it and can be jailed for it or fined for it,
Hmm.
violate some law or regulation. Whereas if you're not a publisher, if you're just a platform, then you are not liable and cannot be sued or jailed or fined. And and now that was used law as it stood. And the reason they got this exemption in place is because they were worried that if they hadn't put it there, then even deleting child pornography or deleting other stuff would cause them to be deemed to be
Wow.
publishers,
Yeah, yeah,
making
yeah.
them liable for anything that they don't delete. And that's why this special exemption rule was placed there. Um, and Trump now claims that they are abusing this exemption, which I think is incorrect. I don't think they are abusing it. Uh, I don't think it is. I mean, I don't like it that social media like Twitter, like Facebook, that they do this, that they block content for being fake news. I don't like it. So if uh, if other people started using another platform, another form of social media that doesn't do it, I would certainly follow them. But I don't think that it's the government's job to restrict them.
Yeah. Let me tell you, Twan, about the creation of Mimo Cache, which is a way to publish tweet-like messages on the Bitcoin Cash blockchain, which can never be censored. Once you tweet it out, it's in the blockchain and it's immutable. Um, we are using that here on stream sometimes to tell people about it, but it does come at a small cost because you have to pay a transaction fee to get it into the blockchain. Um, but there are things that, because you share it in a blockchain kind of system, it becomes immutable, and once it's in the blockchain, nobody can change it back. That is
Mhm.
also tricky, though, of course, for yourself, in case you write something that in a couple of weeks you're gonna think, I wish I wouldn't have written that. It's too late. You can never delete your messages. But
Yeah.
yeah, we have a Mimo.cash account. I'm going to. That's actually something I should do in a second. Write a message there to let the world know that we are having a marathon stream here on Honkler Hangout. So yeah, Twan. I think it's very interesting times that we live in today. There is so much happening on a week-to-week basis that, personally, last week I told you about it. Maybe not 100. I'm not 100% sure, but last Friday I received a new visa for the country where I'm staying now, Serbia, and this allows me to stay here for another year. I'm very happy with that, especially with all the, well, like I said, all these changes that are happening so quickly now, and I really see, how to say it correct, a tremendous shift in consciousness happening with people in a way, and um, yeah, it's exciting times. Let's call it like that, and I'm just very glad that we can have such a direct conversation together. This happened like 2 days, 3 days ago that all these policies were announced by Trump, and here we are talking about it, and we have to see how it continues. But I'm very excited about it because I do think that the story that we try to explain to people since so long, that people are so reluctant to accept, becomes more and more apparent that we are not so far off from reality as many people like to push us in a corner and say, "Oh, these people are just crazy," and it's the world is not like they project us. I think it becomes more and more apparent that the government is this suppressing force, that the government is not here to help us, they are here to benefit from us, and somewhere along the way, somewhere in between the Second World War and today, and actually already before that moment, but uh, uh, the way how we divide power has changed to such a level that, it doesn't really matter any. That's how I feel sometimes. It doesn't matter anymore how I vote. The way how I express that is by saying, I vote with my wallet. Vote with your wallet by e-gulden, right? On the 1 minute in my life that it really mattered the most, I forgot about it. That's still well, it's either a blessing or a curse. I'm still not sure about what it is, but um, so you vote with your wallet, buy cryptos. Let's say it like that, and that is how I live my life since 2012. basically, and I'm buying Bitcoin since that moment, and I'm not saving for a pension. And yeah, I've been trying to tell people around me why I do that, and they just don't want to listen because it's very inconvenient for them. All those things that I tell them, that they are funding wars and that they are, you know. So yeah, I really think that the current time is with us. Time is running in our favor at the moment, and maybe you could end on that. How do you see that in the current times? Do you think that libertarianism is gonna gain traction because of all the suppressing legislation that is currently being brought against the people?
Well, I'm optimistic in the long run. Um, because in the long run, the trend of world history is that knowledge grows.
Hmm. Yeah.
People gain more knowledge, and as a result, bad ideas are being abandoned, and better ideas are being adopted. That's the long-term trend. It's been going on for thousands of years, and since let's say the 1400s, it's been accelerating this process, and since the 1700s, it's been 1600, 1700, it's been accelerating even more. And we seem to reach a peak in the 19th century, in the 1800s, um, and in the first half of the 20th century, it looked pretty bleak for a while because we saw the rise of communism, fascism, National Socialism, the welfare state, mass warfare, world wars. I mean, the first half of the 20th century was disastrous in many ways. So it seemed as if this long-term trend where bad ideas were being abandoned in favor of better ideas had it seemed to have come to a halt. Um, Fortunately, that was only temporary. Um, Fascism, National Socialism were done away with in 1945, and communism has basically ended around 1990,
Yeah.
except for a few holdouts like Cuba and North Korea. And until 1980, we had this trend of taxes getting higher and higher, and more businesses being nationalized, and deregulation was a thing that was sort of unheard of. It was very, very rare. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, that started to change too. Um, I already gave the example of Reagan and Thatcher, who took the first steps towards privatization and cutting tax rates. That happened around 1980. I mean, Thatcher was elected 79, and Reagan was elected 1980. So that was a turning point where that trend finally ended, and finally there were taxes that were being lowered, and companies that were privatized rather than nationalized. So that was good. As for deregulation, that started under Carter actually in the late 70s. Reagan did a lot more deregulation than Carter did, but Trump did even more, and that's one of the very few very good things that Trump has done. He has really cut a lot of regulation. He's cut more regulations in 1 year in his first year than Reagan did in 8 years. So that is something that we should be thankful for. That's something we should praise him for. Um,
I believe when he took office, he made a rule that for every new law that was approved, two should leave. Something like that.
yes, and he's actually done better than that, better than his promise. So that's good. And Trump has also cut some taxes. He didn't cut spending; he raised spending. That's pretty bad, but at least he cut taxes, which is something. And what's also a good thing that he did is he restricted the possibility of deducting federal income tax for the state income tax. And that in itself, you might say, is bad because it raises taxes. But I'm actually in favor of it because it creates more tax competition. If you live in a high tax state like California or New York, and you can no longer deduct
Those
the
taxes.
the state income taxes from your federal income tax purposes, that means you now will start feeling the pain of paying these high local state income
Yeah,
taxes,
yeah, yeah.
which means you're less likely to vote for politicians that want to raise them, and more likely for politicians that want to lower them. And not only that, uh, people vote with their feet. A lot of people are leaving California and New York and Illinois, are moving to states that have no income tax, like Texas and Florida and Nevada. Um, so businesses and entrepreneurs, investors, and talent is simply leaving and packing up and leaving. And as a result, the local politicians are then forced to lower their tax rates, or at least are very restricted in raising them even more.
Yeah.
And tax competition is a great thing. That's what saved us basically from the trend that went up to the 1970s of taxes being higher and higher, going up as high as 97% in the UK. I mean, the only thing that saved us from that is, in the long run, in the world, is tax competition. I mean, the UK and the US were lucky enough to have leaders like Reagan and Thatcher who wanted to bring these tax rates down, but all the other countries lowered these rates as well, and they didn't have politicians that were in favor of it. They just had to go along to prevent
A drainage.
people from leaving.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, so tax competition is a very valuable thing, and by restricting the deductibility of state income taxes, that encourages tax competition. So that's why I'm for it.
I didn't know about that, by the way, Tuan,
Yeah,
about that you could deduct your state income tax with your federal income tax. That's something new for me. You got
yeah,
a compliment here from Crypto Ninja Poker, who says that's actually great info you won't hear in the media. So
yeah. If you're interested in it, Dan Mitchell from the Center for Freedom and Prosperity has written quite extensively about this. I'm afraid I do need to wrap it up. I have another appointment to go to.
okay, Tuan. Well, thanks again for being here once again with us to kick off this marathon stream with us. We will be in
Well,
contact about future streams and how it will go forward. It's also a little bit depending on what's happening today. But thanks a lot for sharing your insight with us and giving your opinion on the things that happened in the last couple of days. So have a good day, have a good week, and we will talk.
till then,
Bye bye.
goodbye.